Hi there, my name is Liliani and I work behind the scenes to support the webinar Black Lives Matter and its implications for our Australian and Oceania context. I am dropping a note here to explain why the flow of this recorded conversation will be different to the live conversation that was led by Rev Tamsyn Kereopa. We have agreed that the rich conversation stimulated by Tamzin sharing deserves to be posted, but to withhold the actual presentation as it pertains to her preliminary PhD research, not yet ready for circulation. Thankfully, Tamzin is open to rejoining these conversations in the future and sharing more of her research. Without further ado, I pass it on to Reverend Loffa, who welcomes you to the February webinar.
Happy belated New Year and welcome back to our first webinar for 2022. Black Lives Matter webinar started about a year ago as a space for sharing, learning and deepening the understanding about Black Lives Matter in the Australian and Oceania context and why such issues matter to people of faith. We wanted to provide a welcoming and safe space for all who wish to explore in more depth the impact of social and structural injustices on Black lives in these lands now called Australia, and to sketch out what standing in solidarity with Indigenous peoples looks like from their perspectives. As non-Indigenous Australians, we have been honoured, humbled, and inspired each month, and we thank all our Indigenous colleagues and friends who have contributed their time and energy to this webinar. International attention has encouraged us to expand beyond our national borders, and we begin this year's conversations by zooming across the Tasman to share insights and perspectives with our Kiwi cousins. For those of you joining live, we encourage you to actively participate in this conversation through comments and add any questions you have in the Q&A section if you are asking through Zoom. We welcome from Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Reverend Tamsyn Kereopa, and we now invite Tamsyn to open our webinar with an acknowledgement of land and prayer. Thank you, Tamsyn.
Thank you for your welcome. Ko te tuatahi a kororia ki te atua I runga rawa, he mau ngā rongo ki te mata o te whenua he whakaaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. Ko Tamzin Kereopa tōku ingoa, ko Te Arawa me Tuwharetoa o ku iwi no taupo ahau. Kia ora tēnā koutou everyone, my name is Tamzin Kereopa. I am an ordained deacon in the Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia. I descend from the Central North Island tribes from Rotorua and Taupo, Te Arawa and Tuwharetoa, but I currently reside in Dunedin, the bottom of the South Island, because I'm doing my PhD research here at the university. So I'd like to pay respects now to the people of the land here in Dunedin, Ngai Tahu. I'd also like to thank you all so much for your generous invitation and to pay respects to the people of the land in Australia, the many different peoples of the land that are there. I'm so honoured that you invited me. Hopefully I can be of some assistance to you, and I'm looking forward to any comments and contributions and discussion that we can have together. So let me open with a prayer. Kei noi tātou, let us pray. E te atua kaharawa, e tū wherananga ngā kau katoa ki a koe. E mohi o tia ana ngā hia katoa. E kore hoki e ngāro I a koe te meo hona. Whakahangia I hoto wairua tapu, hei whakamāinga whakaro o mātou ngā kau. Kia tino aroha e mātou ki a koe, kia tika ai te whakanui I tō ingoa tapu, Ko i hukarai tēnei tō mātou ariki. Āmene.
Amen. Amen.
I'd also like to, oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I'd also like to send my love and greetings to Reverend Dr. Katalina Tahaafe-Williams, who invited me to join, who's my longtime friend and mentor. And it's so good to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that opening. So I'm just going to introduce us because some people might be joining this for the first time this year, which is exciting. So I'll introduce our three regular panels and then Tamzin as well. So my name is Leah Miller. I'm a minister of the Word in the Uniting Church in Australia, currently serving with Forest Kirk Uniting Church, and I'm on the lands of the Gayal people. I also host the Love, Rinse, Repeat podcast, where I interview theologians and ministers and artists and folk. And I'm a PhD candidate in Charles Sturt University. Reverend Taualofa Anga'aelangi is an ordained deacon in the Uniting Church, serving as a tertiary chaplain at Charles Sturt University, where she just got off a very busy O week. And so we're very fortunate to have you here and awake. So thanks, Lofa. As a theologian from Oceania, Lofa hopes to see more theological work from those at the grassroots of Pacifica. Lofa believes that the church is accountable in creating space for truth-telling and active listening, and sees this webinar as a response for collaboration for bringing faith, justice, and academia together. Reverend Dr. Katalina Tahaafe-Williams is an Oceanian womanist theologian. Katalina has served the world church and the ecumenical movement as a leader in public and contextual theology, ecumenical missiology, interfaith relations, racial justice, and multicultural ministry. She holds degrees from both the Universities of New South Wales, London, and Birmingham, UK. And just to note, for those who watch regularly, our other regular panelist, Emma Jackson, is taking a little break from the panel so that she can really crack down on her PhD, which we respect greatly as a decision to take, but it was see you later more than goodbye. So Emma, if you're watching, we send our love. And also joining, we heard a bit from Reverend Tamzin Karyopa, who is a Maori feminist theologian, currently doing her PhD at Otago University. Tasman is a descendant of the Tuwharetoa and Te Arawa tribes in Aotearoa and an ordained deacon in the Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia. And is a member of the WCC Ecumenical Indigenous Network and the Commission on Ecumenical Theological Education and Formation. Our conversation this month gives us an opportunity to explore in more depth the impact of social and structural injustices on Black Lives Matter in New Zealand.
Tamzin, this is a fantastic way to get us all, energized and agitated, because that's what I'm feeling. So thank you very much. I was thinking as you talk that while you're focusing on Maori women, and you're very absolutely right when you highlight the fact that in much of the conversations and the narratives and the practices thus far to do with the autonomy and the justice for Maori, Maori women have often been excluded or not even thought about, or maybe assumed that they were included when in fact they're not. Yeah. So in terms of what you've brought to us today, we are talking about the lives of Black people in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but specifically Maori women in this instance, and that's really helpful. And talking about the liberation theology and its task. So I'm very grateful that you brought together the different categories of race and gender and class, and then Maori culture itself, in this conversation that will really opens up the whole field for us to, have a lot to talk about. So I just wanted to comment, on that. But I'd love to hear what the rest of the panelists, might have to say, or any questions that they might have for you in the light of what you've just shared with us. Thank you so much, Tamzin.
One question I have, and I'm interested to see, like Katalina and Lofa, I'm sure have wrestled with this too, but thinking about the way, as you say, that like trying to wrestle with some of these schools of thought or writers that have been kind of liberative within a particular tradition, like say, you know, wrestling with feminist writings from white feminists, or with say like writings on socialism that come from Europe. Like what's often pointed out in Indigenous critiques is like this isn't what's gonna get us free. You know, we don't need to stop looking to Europe to solve the problems that Europe brought, kind of thing. That, but obviously also there's, you know, you're incorporating these kind of works, and there's plenty out there. I'm thinking of, you know, someone like Cedric Robertson who writes Black Marxism, right? So I'm going to take up a tradition, but I'm going to bring this lived experience and try to critique and fill in what's there. So I'm curious about your kind of approach to that kind of work, and, you know, are there times where you're like, it's all too hard? I mean, to start totally outside this, or ways that you engage that these traditions that come, or these methodologies that have emerged, that have had liberative potential for some, but often to the detriment or the ignoring of others, and how that's something that you kind of are wrestling with, either in the thesis or just in your work kind of at large.
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm really at the identification of the systems that are causing the oppression. So and to be honest, this is going to be a PhD in theology. So I'm not going to look to look at alternative, for instance, social paradigms or economic paradigms as such. I'm going to be coming at these issues from a theological perspective. But definitely I agree with the fact, and there's so much talk in Māori economics about the fact that we can't look to Marx, you know, for a response to capitalism and things like that. We're saying that this is actually not our problem to solve. This is imposed on us. This is what's wrong. So you know what I mean? Of course, we want to respond to these things, and I would love to, but mine is a theological task mostly in my research. So that's, sorry, very inadequate answer, but
no, it's great.
Can I say something about that? Can I respond to that, Liam?
Yeah.
As well?
Yeah.
Like I was thinking as you're asking the question, and I'm very happy that, you know, I heard what Tamzin said, because she's absolutely right. You know, these are. Thank you, Tamzin, that you articulated very clearly that you're looking into the systems, and you have articulated quite clearly how colonization had, you know, contributed in so many ways to informing, shaping, and defining the notions and the values that has been imposed on Indigenous peoples, you know, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but all over the globe. But you know, I'm at the stage in my life and in my ministry and my theology where I think, as you know, minority ethnic people, as Pacific Islanders, as, you know, non-white theologians, non-Western, we should be defining things for ourselves and say, you know, bugger that's been tried and didn't help. It's exacerbated the problem, or has, you know, created other problems. But we need to go back to basics of who we are as, you know, Polynesians, for example, you know, as Indigenous peoples living, who have, you know, a track of millennia of how we've been able to exist on this earth, you know, in systems that has worked, you know, for that long, and draw some of our, you know, lessons and solutions from that. Like I just wrote an article for another global publication that I'm involved in, and I'm writing a Theology of Anger, like, you know, and my whole thing is, like, you know, it's like a proverbial, you know, finger to all the people who are telling us, don't be angry because, you know, it's a chip on your shoulders, you know, it's not the way to be, you're not civilized, it's not acceptable, you know. And I want to say, yeah, I want to be angry, and I bloody want you to notice that I am angry, you know, and take my anger seriously and not just dismiss it because, you know, oh, another minority ethnic woman, another Black woman, you know, with a chip on her shoulders, you know, who's got issues, like, you know. So I think we need to really assert that space, you know, I mean, claim that space and assert that we have the right, we have the ability and the capacity to define things for ourselves, given what we've been brought up with because we still have a lot of those values and traditions that has been, internalized as we were brought up with our families and our grandmothers and ancestors. We need to draw on those things as resources and strength, to define things, to define the world as we see it and how we see the future needs to be, Anyway, this is my rant. I'll shut up now. Yeah. Lofa, you should say something now.
I'll just pick up with from where Katalina had her rant. I'm interested to know how do we navigate through those basics, through those values that you both spoke about, what our ancestors and all that had, some of the practices that they had given us. A friend of mine wrote this really provocative poem, Mariana Waka, and she talked about the situation in Fiji, but she talked about the colonizers. The colonizers today they're no longer foreigners. They look like us now. So I'm wondering how do we navigate and find what is life-giving to us women today in terms of us defining who we are, and all of that.
Yeah, it's so difficult because they're all so, we would say it's an intersectional thing, right? It's that everything's all so connected. So there's always this tension in theology. This is, as old as theology, how to get back to a supposed kernel of what is true and what is imposed and what is current. I'd like to say that tradition is alive and it grows, and it grows with us and it changes. So we're not trying to say this is a tradition as it was like 200 years ago. We need to separate it from this thing over there. And, it's a growing tradition, and we learn. The hard thing is to be aware of this all intersectionally, as you say, and to take that all into consideration. But yeah, definitely. Even I'm just thinking now of the economic discussions. What would an Indigenous contribution to an economic discussion be if we're saying we're going to be talking about our traditions, etc., etc. It's not that we go back 200 years. Potentially we do. I don't know, but we can still take what we're doing now. And
so Liliani, hurry up and do the PhD. I totally agree. I agree, and and the thing that I'm thinking about, Lofa, in response to your question, is that for us, the onus is on us, people like us, from these, from Indigenous backgrounds, to actually, to step up and do this with the awareness that Tamzin is speaking about. But I also am really clear in my mind, and from my own experience, that we have to be very, very, very confident about our bicultural capacities, and it's about being completely, we have to do the work and the hard work. And the people that Lofa says are now the colonizers of today are like us. To me, I may be very dismissive of those people, but those are people who've not done the work, to bloody well learn about their own background, their roots, their culture, and where they've come from, and do that in 100% quality way, not just some superficial, tipping your toes into the water, and then do the same with the dominant culture and be confident about your capacity and ability, to understand that culture, to be deeply, in depth in your knowledge and perspective of it, and then that's what I mean by being aware in the way that Tamzin talks about. And then you're able to critique, it's like I've been living with this whole mantra of, you've got to master the tools to dismantle the master's house, and you do that for the dominant culture, but you do it for your own as well, So there's a lot of work that we need to do. And when you see the colonizers that look like us, Lofa, in the way that you're talking, for me, I just go, well, those are people that I'm not going to pay attention to, because they haven't done the work. But we've got to do the work. those of us who are aware, you know. So that's my response to that question.
Tamzin, I should also mention that folks want to start asking questions and putting them in the Q&A chat or on Facebook or here. Yes. Do that now. But Tamzin, we've had a couple of guests, as Lofa mentioned earlier. Last year was a lot of Indigenous guests from these lands, and sometimes the topic turned to a bit. So we've got this kind of general framing of Black Lives Matter in this part of the world, and you know, often the work being done in these panel sessions last year was talking about how, like, what does that mean here, and like, you know, what does it mean in a very different context with an Indigenous group, you know, and often, you know, different kind of population percentage, different cult, you know, different history, all that. I'm curious. I mean, it's a huge question, but just a little bit of what, you know, Black Lives Matter in Aotearoa, Black Lives Matter from that kind of marriage perspective. How have you found, like, has it been something that's been embraced? Do you think, like, yeah, we're going to get in on this kind of global momentum? Is it something that's kind of cautiously engaged? Is it, how have you found that in that kind of context where you're living and working?
So I think in New Zealand, especially for Māori, we've had an ongoing for decades race-based activism and things going on. We have had certain groups like the Māori, they actually called it the Black Women's Movement, I think, in the 80s. It's difficult with things like Black Lives Matter, as you know, for 1,000 different reasons. It is often treated cautiously. It's seen more as an overseas thing. It is, and I know this may be shared with other Indigenous peoples, is also very much relies on an. It's coloured. It's based on colour a lot. So for Indigenous people, often the discussions are different and are not in that same space. But definitely in so many ways, we align with the principles of Black Lives Matter. Obviously, the same constructions that led to, especially, you know, racism, everything like this that's led to slavery, are the underpinning currents of colonial imperialism that we've been subject to. So in that way, we're there. But in terms of how it is framed for other people, we're cautious of engaging in it as a Black Lives Matter conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Some of the things we've talked about in this webinar is how in this part of the world, white privilege is a notion that hasn't been talked about very often, or, you know, doesn't have a widespread kind of, consciousness in New Zealand and Australia, or people don't really want to talk about it. Does it go back to what you've just said, that there's a hesitancy because it's focusing on color racism as opposed to cultural racism?
Perhaps, and I think it's well known in discussions in New Zealand that New Zealand, I don't want to generalize here, okay, so don't come at me, okay. But we're very cautious of calling out racism because we perceive ourselves to be very enlightened and forward and progressive, and, you know, so there's it's a faux pas type thing, you know, we don't want to look at that. So yeah, there's a lack of real, even in the Māori rights activism, I actually think there's a lot of lack of specifically talking about race. So yeah, maybe that's something we're scared to talk about, or we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves, that that the other people are the racists, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. How would you, really how has it been spoken about in Australia?
Well, the fact that we're the only Black Lives Matter, webinar or forum in any level that I've heard about, you know, says a lot. But Leah might want to say something about that as well.
I think there's definitely been like a here's a momentum we can talk about it thing, and I think what people are using that opportunity to be like is trying to get people to stop doing that thing. We look at America and go, oh, thank God we don't have a race problem like over there, right? Like, or thank God we never had slavery. And I was like, well, or things like that. I think so. It's kind of being used to be like, great, it's so big that it can't be ignored. Let's now try to hone in and focus on this. But again, I think, there is this kind of particular, like I remember Gary Deverell, who joined us one for talking about how just that huge difference of a lot of Indigenous activism starting with, country and land and things like that, and that's a difference and needs to be talked about again and again, the color aspect, a lot of that. So I think like it's definitely been engaged and you'll see it utilized, but also a kind of cautiousness. And I think also that, I remember Brooke saying something, because in America, Brooke Prentice, so when she joined us, because in America, you'll see a lot of language of like, stop burdening Black people, go and do the work, go and read the books. And she's like, it works there because there's a whole, there's a giant publishing industry and there's so much you can access, so it makes sense not to text your Black friend to explain racism to you. But kind of here, it's like, there's still so like trying to get voices out there is so important. So don't go like, well, we don't want to bother an Indigenous person to talk about race. We'll pay some white guy to do it. It's like, let's challenge that. So I think it's definitely picked up, but again, with some critique and a desire to, ground it.
I mean, I still remember like 2015, which is not that long ago, when I was 14, 15, when I was trying to teach white privilege in UTC and have half the white students complaining about it and all the colored students not saying anything at all, like they went and complained to the dean and others. And those are ministers who are practicing in the Uniting Church now. They complained that I was teaching white privilege, in the class. But now, but the whole notion of wanting to not overburden Indigenous people by, asking them to teach us about, racism and white privilege and all of that has been ongoing in this country for some time, but like I think what is ironic is that the ones that I knew were complaining about me teaching, critical race and white privilege are the ones who are now saying, oh yes, white races and white privilege, we should be, paying attention to it. Lofa knows all about that, don't you, Lofa?
Yeah, and also too, I'm not going to generalize here either, but
go on.
You want to be careful about you wanting to listen to them when you have your little thing you've organized, but when they're speaking on their own context and you're not listening is why you have a lack of engagement from Indigenous peoples, because it's just, there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So maybe running with Indigenous-led things. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the way to go. Yeah. Lofa?
No, I was just saying yes to a lot of things that are being said here. So I mean, I guess it's this whole Zoom we won't be able to solve it. But I mean, how do we? When are they going to take us seriously? So should I be asking Liam? When are we going to be taken seriously, Liam?
Yeah. I mean, there's a pessimistic side for sure. I mean, I think a lot. I was reading recently Professor Chelsea Watego's Another Day on the Colony, and I think like a lot of her stress is on like the need to work around waiting on white benevolence to choose to listen, right? To choose to heed and pay attention, the need to develop, institutional structural change. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I definitely think there's been shifts, yes. But it's no, there's so much work to be done. There's still so much resistance, immediate walls up or very like agreement to do kind of on the superficial side of things. But like, I do think you've seen more like, a lot of people did turn out to, events over the last year. The stuff around January 26 is increasing again, more and more. I see friends who, I never thought were radical by any standpoint, now will post about how we shouldn't be celebrating on this day. Whether that's, people might critique, okay, you're still saying we should celebrate another day, and that's a problem because we should, you just can't. But, I think it's interesting to start to, see maybe bits and pieces. But I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't venture to answer and I wouldn't want to be too optimistic, but, just because I could be completely wrong. But
just to let Tamzin know that we're still debating in Australia whether we, the whole idea of celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January, which is a day of mourning and, invasion for Indigenous Australians. But yeah, that's part of what, Leah.
Well, it's not really a debate for Indigenous peoples, right?
Mm.
It's it's very much no.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
But the whole society is still debating it.
But I also think too, even despite lack of progress, I think this is why I'm into liberation theology. It's the overriding hope of the gospel, right? And I don't want this to sound like passe or anything like that, but this is Christ, the Jesus, the hope of concrete liberation in life that will happen. We're working towards that goal. So not to let the lack of progress be disheartening in any way, And I know we want answers tomorrow, but yeah.
Brian Collier asked about the dawn raids.
Oh, okay. The dawn raids actually, they were against Pacifica communities in New Zealand. So for myself, I don't have a huge knowledge. I'm sorry. I won't be able to speak to them in any greatly informed way. Being Māori, that was not my experience. But I do understand that the government put forward an apology recently, I think the end of last year.
That's right.
For the dawn raids, a beautiful cultural ceremony that was done, and the Prime Minister did apologize and admitted that that was wrong. So
and I know about that because I have relatives and many family members and relatives who were running from one house to the other trying to hide from the dawn raids. I mean, I was very little, but I remember, the conversation with families telling us, all of a sudden the address has changed because they, we didn't know about it because they've moved because of the dawn raid. But
does the question
apology from the New Zealand government, so I saw that.
I'm wondering if the questioner has some particular experience with the dawn raids. They were thinking
Brian just followed up to say he's critiquing the apology in a piece coming up.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a debate around whether the apology was sincere or performative.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. We just marked one of the anniversary of the apology to the stolen generations, which happened in 2008, I think. So I think I got the date right. And that obviously stirred again quite a lot of controversy because Prime Minister Scott Morrison in his comments had a line about saying sorry is hard, but what's even harder to say is I forgive you, which is again this putting the onus on the burden on that. Which I mean, if liberation theology kind of leads us to anything, it is a much more robust sense of sin and the need to take accountability for sin in a broader sense of repair and whole societal transformation, rather than kind of individual I apologize and then it's on you to forgive 70 times 7 or something like that.
Forgive my ignorance, but does Australia have anything like the Truth and Reconciliation process or not really?
No.
Okay.
A couple of states
that will be why he
would.
That's why he rushed into the talk of forgiveness. Maybe I don't know.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, but and the thing that I'm thinking about is that the whole burden of saying sorry, and then because I'm reading more and more, and when I talked about my whole theology of anger, some of that anger comes about because there's apology and then nothing follows, and then forgiveness is expected and healing when, there's practice. And one of the things about liberation theology from South America, Latin America, that, I've always been, inspired by is that, the focus on action was very strongly a component of liberation theology. You don't just say sorry, you follow it with action, action that makes a difference, that is visibly making a difference, and people have died for that, doing that. But, and if we're using Christ as the model, well, he died on the cross for that, there's no better example. But these, the history is so much so that, there may the dominant culture and the colonizers might get to a point of thinking, yes, we should apologize, but then the step is not taken further, for what needs to happen so that real reconciliation and real healing can happen. And that's why a lot of anger comes out of, the victims who are then labeled further as, violent, having a tendency to violence and, like it's constant and never ending that, the onus is always put on the victim. And we know that in other areas of trauma, and other areas of violence where the onus is so much always on the victim. And that has always been the case with Indigenous people, from colonization, from the moment that they were colonized to this day, that the onus is always on the Indigenous people. And, anyway, might want to say something about that, Tamzin.
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. But I also feel like, and I don't say this as like a pushback to what you've said, but I also feel like we definitely have the capacity to do this. It's just that these conversations need to be led by us and they're not. So it's always,
No, you're absolutely right.
While I do agree that definitely the onus is always put back on the victim, I do have a strong belief that we obviously have the capacity to take this to task and to deal with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
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 I mean, I totally agree. Absolutely. When I say the onus, I mean we're given the burden is on us to prove our case. And and we should. I guess we will have to do that. There's no. I guess that's the only way to make the case. And Leah mentioned Gary before. Gary is constantly putting out, statements about, the whole Australia Day, debate. And, and I'm just, I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but I never cease to be shocked at some of the responses. You think that people, that the responses to what he's saying, and Gary talked about being weary as an Indigenous person. Indigenous people are so tired, and that's the case, that's a sense that we feel definitely here in Australia, isn't it, Liam and Lofa? We feel that sense of weariness. And maybe in some ways there is a difference between the Australian context and the New Zealand context, because, in many ways, of course, the Māori are more visible and strongly represented in ways in the public sphere in a way that maybe not the same with Aboriginal Australians. Would I be right about that, Liam and Lofa? I mean, my knowledge is that it says yes. In New Zealand, Maoris have a stronger voice in comparison to Indigenous in Australia.
I mean, Tams is probably better set to say this. I think we definitely have that perception in the sense of, you meet a lot of white New Zealanders in the sense of maybe they'll, know some language, or there's a sense of there's the treaty, or even the nation, right? That we don't just say New Zealand. So like we from here might look and go, oh, there's all these visible things, or there's some structural things. I wonder if, over there it's
not
look, don't it's not all like, as you said before, that kind of almost that fear of maybe speaking out because we're meant to have it all enlightened and together. But so I think there is a sense of that, like that I've heard and read that sense of visibility, a difference. But I'd be curious to see how it actually, whether that perception is accurate.
Yeah, I can't speak on the experience in Australia because I have little knowledge of that. But in New Zealand, that's what I mean. Internationally, they play on this reputation for being, all the good things, including racially beautiful, but for Māori people, this is not. We have been fighting for decades and decades and decades, literally fighting. And some of the small gains that we have fought for and died for, that have finally gone through and things are now sometimes played as an accolade to the dominant power because, oh yes, we did this, you know, we're so lovely. So it's like it exacerbates the problem for us too. And then they say, so why are you still angry if we're doing these things? So then we're seen as even extra annoying and just angry, and what Katalina was saying, just OTT, you know, off the, you know, rails. If we continue to point out things because, hey, look, we did this for you, what are you even moaning about, type thing. So it's definitely hard. Yeah.
The use of feminists. You identify yourself as a feminist. What?
Yeah. Katalina identifies me as a feminist.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So my dissertation is towards a Wahine Maori theology of liberation. Wahine being woman, Māori, obviously Māori woman theology of liberation. That was kind of an intentional title. There's lots of different titles. Mana Wahine is a big framework that is used for Māori women scholars that I decided not to specifically use for some reasons. Some Māori women call themselves Māori feminists. Yeah, I just feel like there's a burden of understanding with all of those labels that I kind of didn't quite fit with what I was doing. So I just called it a Wahine Maori theology of liberation. I don't know if that answers what, yeah.
I nearly labeled you like me as a womanist a Polynesian theologian, but you know,
that was the first time I heard you labeled as a womanist. I was interested in that. Good. Actually, I am using a lot of womanist scholarship in my research too. So
yeah.
I just wanted to share one comment that came through on the Facebook, which is just Mike Mawson just wanted to share his thanks for Tamzin for a rich and challenging paper, and then thanks for the discussion, and really appreciate the webinar and the honesty and directness in this space. So just wanted to read that out. Thanks, Mike. Do we want to do closing thoughts?
I'm not sure where to start. There's so much to take in. So malo aupito, Tamzin. Look, there's so much talk on women being commodified, and for some reason I never thought about that. What capitalism does is it places value on women as commodities, especially Indigenous people. Value is only put on people, on commodities, after it's been exploited, and that for me is it's a really big statement. I guess I didn't put that in the same order that you did, but yeah, I never thought about it that way. So yeah,
it's interesting too, and especially for Māori in terms of land, the commodification of natural resources, land, water. That's a huge, capitalism is a huge part of our fight. Yeah. And as they say of people, as a person just living there as a baby who has no value in the market, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. I mean, so much. It's so rich, and I cannot wait in whenever many years time I get to read this dissertation. It's going to be very, so 3. There we go. I love it. So, but yeah, and I think 2 things that really struck me and stayed with me was one about that comment about, you know, who should be hosting and running these spaces, and are we listening when it's not like when it is a space that we're just truly just there and get to listen and not organizing and or as white people, or you know. So I think that was so helpful. And then just the point again about, like, you know, it's so tempting to go and look for, you know, go read Marx or what have you, or whoever it might be, and you know, sometimes it's that feeling almost like that we, you know, you go here, you know, that temptation, you know, go to the Indigenous context writers for story and accessory, and then go somewhere else for theory, right, and for the richness of that. And I think, you know, that's obviously very problematic for a lot of reasons. So it'd be a great reminder again here. And I'm going to go on mute before this foot takes over.
So I mean, when you talk about commodification of, women and human beings in general, and the capitalist system and economic system, I keep thinking, Liliani, hurry up with the PhD, because that's, those are topics that she covers. I'm thinking about what I just heard from Liam. It's so true about the hosting, but I just feel like for us, Polynesians and non-Western peoples, I think that we can't afford to not delve into everything. We've got to get to know what Marxism is about, all the theories, so sociological theories, and all the theologies and all the philosophies, as much as humanly possible. And it's possible. I've done it, to do as much as possible as one human being, because I think it's important that we do that. We do that so that we can speak with confidence and feel, that we cannot be challenged. I mean, we can be challenged, but we can stand up and say, yeah, well, push back to you, right back at you, but that we can also have, with integrity and strength, say what we need to say, because we're delving also into our own roots, into the cultural resources that we've come from, and value that, because we are the only ones who can promote that and actually value it, So that's the one thing that I wanted to say about that. And I just want to thank Tamzin. It's been fantastic to have you, and we will have you again if you're willing, before your 3 years, doing the PhD is up, we will have you back in our, as in this panel. So thank you very much for the wonderful, amazing, rich talk. I'm so pleased, and I'm so proud of you, and I still love you. So,
thank you. I love you too. Thank you so much. It was so good to be here. Thank you for your generous engagement in my discussion. Hopefully next time I come, I will be able to speak more to the theological work that I've done by that time. So that would be good. But in the meantime, thank you all so much. It's great to see you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So thank you everybody who's zoomed in. And we love when you send in questions. We really, really appreciate that, and comments. The next one on the 27th of March, we have got the Dr. Jenny Tapaa as our panelist. And Jenny is a beloved sister of mine and Tamzin's. We love her and admire her so much, and she has a very amazing global profile as a theologian. So we are very blessed that she's willing to come on. So we look forward to next month with Jenny Tapaa. And of course, we continue our series on Indigenous theologies. That's what we're still doing, and which is why it's really crucial that Tamzin continues to be, one of our future panelists. So yeah, looking forward to that very much. I'm sure that all of us are in the same boat, that our hearts are breaking for the people of the Ukraine. Thinking of what's going on there. And I feel like I'd just like us to have a moment of silence. And I'll just, close with a very brief prayer. And I want us to say the Lord's Prayer together as we think about the people of the Ukraine, and of course the people of Russia, but especially those who are standing up and protesting and saying no to war. I think that we need more of those people to stand up in that context, if they're able to. Hopefully their government will listen and put in. But can we have a moment of silence, just thinking about what's going on in that part of the world? And of course the pandemic continues to be a worry for many of us, but I'm particularly worrying about the people of the Ukraine. Lord Jesus, we give thanks that your light has shone for us on this day, Transfiguration Sunday. You are our beloved Savior and Lord. And through your saving grace, you have helped all of us to see a vision for how we can share in your light for this world. And we pray particularly for your light of compassion, of justice, of peace and love, to be real and to stop the insanity of what is going on in the Ukraine with a powerful neighbor doing what it is doing. We pray for the safety of all the people who are suffering, and we pray for peace and for comfort for those who have already lost loved ones. And we say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Deliver us from evil, for power. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Sorry. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
I feel like, I dropped out or something.
No.
So, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Tamzin.
Thank you.
Great that,
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll see you all again next month. We'll keep you posted, Tamzin.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Lofa.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye, Sushana.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, we can hear your voice. Fantastic.